Welcome to the Subconscious Mind Mastery Podcast. Thomas Miller again, and I wanted to check in kind of with a piggyback of what we talked about last time in number 419, this spiritual wave that is sweeping literally the world in the wake of Charlie Kirk's martyrdom, in my consideration. I mean, look up the definition. I think it fits. Regardless, there is a very powerful spiritual move ensuing, and obviously, since the incident happened on the 10th, Christianity has become full focus. If you're a longtime listener to this podcast, you know a lot of the early themes of the early years back in 2000. I can't believe how long we've been doing this. But a lot of that was just my own story of grappling with the belief system that I grew up with, which was not only Christianity, but fundamental Christianity. And some recent stuff in my own personal life has resurfaced here, so it's like, okay, let's take a look at the spotlight, and again, the same way we did it last time. I want to do it from a very neutral, observant, and emotional feeling into, rather than analyzing from the head, because that's one of the things that has kicked in around all of this that I want to try to guide us back to, is to retune ourselves to our soul and to our spirit and to the internal voice, because I know we've been feeling and experiencing and analyzing and bombarded with social media, and so much is in our head. Let's use this to get back to our heart. While I was preparing some notes and thoughts on this, I had a playlist going. It was the Chill Mix on Spotify. I think it's their thing. I don't think you could replicate it. But something came up that was, I love it when this happens. There's a song called Mind Karma. It's from that Ram Dass mix from his elderly years after his stroke. You can look it up. It's the East Forest, I think is the name of the quote-unquote album, whatever the collection of songs, East Forest, and it's called Mind Karma. If you put Mind Karma Ram Dass into Spotify, I think you'll get it. I just had to look it up. Listen to some of these words. Our karma is our mind, and the mind stands in the way of a clear view of God. Our minds give us clouded perceptions. Individualism leads to war and anger and insecurity and fear. Our karma is our mind. Our minds give us clouded perceptions. Mind Karma, again by Ram Dass, at least available on Spotify. Boy, is that a bullseye for right now? Could you relate to that? So we've been in our heads. Let's find a way out. And I wanted to also talk about how we can relate to this elevated, escalated, and very prolific around the world emphasis on Christianity. Because I know how a lot of you feel, because I've communicated with you over the years. And I have felt probably every one of the emotions out there at one time myself. So it's getting a lot of attention. Churches and Bibles and etc. are getting a lot of attention. So this is kind of a user's guide for this little period right now, with the intention of returning all of it to exactly what Ram Dass said, back to our heart. You may be one of these people who are exactly where things are right now, that you've heard this message, it has connected with your heart, and you've bought a Bible or gone to church. That's great. Hopefully some things in here will help. And then you may also be one who has just really closed the door on this, and I would invite you to also maybe open up a little bit. Let's see if we can make some safe space. Quick history, background. If you have not heard some of the early episodes, and I know it's hard to drop into a podcast and go back 400 episodes, but this really has been an audio journey. I accepted Jesus when I was, you ready for this? 3 years old. I remember it clearly to this day. We were attending a Presbyterian church in downtown Tulsa, and they had this beautiful stained glass from a famous painting of Jesus holding a lantern and knocking at an old, ancient, like cabin kind of door from a European medieval kind of setting. And the verse is from Revelation, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." But I'm telling you, I have in my astrology chart Neptune glued to my sun. So that kind of thing would and it's at 6 degrees. This happened at 3 years old, so it all fit. Now I see it clearly through the sky. Neptune is our portal to God. So as a child whose mind hadn't gotten messed up yet, I felt that real connection. It was outside of the mind karma. It was purely of the heart. And I'm telling you, through this situation, going back, that is the connection that I have felt through this whole thing. So that's where I know something is going on. And just hear those words through a life lived. I mean, these are real experiences. And the purest form of it is 3 years old, because I wasn't all polluted by the mind, by the stuff, by life. Grew up in the church, went to Christian schools, went to a Christian college because I had to, and was going to go into seminary. Sophomore year, I was offered a broadcasting opportunity. I took it, and that was the end of that. I felt guilty about it for about 3 decades, but then I finally realized, again, through my path, that was the very best thing that could have happened. Fast forward to 48 years old, I kind of just followed along with everything. I didn't challenge anything, but I was, kind of just doing my thing. But after that second divorce, that was when I just completely threw out the belief system, rebuilt it, and that's what you're hearing now. And that rebuilding had a lot of twists and turns, believe me. Many of those are documented here, too. Okay, so let me give you a couple of things of the Bible. If you have picked one up and you kind of want where do I go with this thing? Let me give you a couple of ideas. First of all, it is divided into 2 sections. You already know this, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is basically Hebrew history, revered to this day. The first 5 books, the Torah, the Old Hebrew law, still very much in practice. Then you have a section after that of the kings. This is where we get into Saul and David and Solomon, etc. I'm not going to go into the history of it, but that's the section. And then we kind of have a little middle, and this is what I'd like to focus your attention to. The book of Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, right in through there. It's like this interlude. Many of the Psalms, or songs, were written by King David as songs. Worship songs. Those are a really good way to connect with your heart. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. I lift up my eyes into the hills, from where my help comes. Job is a story that a lot of people say was the first book that was canonized, that was written. It's the earliest in the historical timeline. I don't know, but some people report that. Job is a story about a man who walked with God and then lost everything, lost his wealth, his family, everything. And it's a story of restoration, because in the end, he stayed with God and was blessed with everything being restored again. And see, if you overlap things, then you get consistencies. And even that right there overlaps what astrology is all about, because the whole sky, the whole picture, the whole purpose of it, contained in that planet Neptune, which is glued to my sun, is about returning to God, returning to source, returning to highest power. It's the same picture. We were lost. It's the Genesis story right there in the beginning of the book. We were connected to source. We were separated from source. We returned to source. And again, carrying our theme of this episode, that is a heart connection more than a head connection. You can also start with the Proverbs, which I would highly suggest, because there are 31 chapters in Proverbs, so that's one a day through the month. That's written by King David's son Solomon. There's a story about that you can find, but he was considered the wisest man on the earth. God granted him a wish to honor his father David, and Solomon chose wisdom above all else. God said, because you chose that over riches and wealth and kingdoms, I'm going to give you a lot of it. Well, that spills over into Proverbs, and then you could go into Ecclesiastes. Song of Solomon is completely different, but that's the thing. And then it goes into the prophets to kind of wrap up at the end. A lot of that, I'm telling you, a lot of that is hard to understand, to just pick it up and read it. Without context, you have to know Hebrew history, period history, how it all fits together, the prophets, how that fits together. But boy, if you go to Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and even Job, if you want to read that story, good place to start. Then we turn to the New Testament. This is about Jesus. Starts with 4 Gospels, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, written by followers/disciples. Now, the three of them, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are parallel. In other words, you could lay them almost side by side. Mark is written very quick. It's a Twitter version of the three. Luke is written by a physician. John was the disciple that Jesus loved, but a lot of people say that because John is so different, that it could have been added in by non-disciple writers, let's just say. Then Acts is the book of the ACTS. That's the book of the post-Jesus resurrection, what happened then. That's what Acts is. Then it gets into the letters that were penned by the Apostle Paul. Boy, you can get into a controversy about that because a lot of people think that Paul had a distinct agenda and that he was not a really good person. Let's set that aside for a second because we'll come back to it here when I kind of pull all this together. Then you have letters written by others. So Peter, James, John, the book of Hebrews, which is unattributed to a particular author. A lot of people think Paul may have done it. And then you have the ultimate book on prophecy, the end times, the book of Revelation. And grammar police here, a lot of times it is called the Revelations. It is the book of Revelation. It is one collective revelation. So you can be grammar police and point that out if you want. Totally unnecessary, but I wanted to point it out. Okay, now, if you want to really get the gist of the New Testament, start with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and read the letters in red. Those are the quoted words attributed to Jesus. Now, I'm not going to get into all of this. It's very documented. You can AI it, you can Google it, you can however you want to get there, but what you're holding in your hand from today's Bible was assembled by councils that occurred under the leadership of the Roman Emperor Constantine in the 300s AD. Constantine is a controversial figure, so was his mother. There's a lot of history on that you should read because it's like, how is it that I'm holding this thing in my hand here that has preserved and stayed intact for 2,000 years? This is another piece of it that you need to understand. So basically, the Roman Empire was crumbling. There was this movement that had originated out of Palestine, Israel, Judea. The countries were all different then. And Constantine's mother had become a Christian. Well, he made it the state religion, the official religion. And in fact, it became a death penalty if you didn't follow it. So the center, the power center of the Mediterranean then focused on Rome and the Vatican. The state church was established. And they took all the writings, had councils, that's group meetings, and they decided collectively what was going to become the canonized scripture. And that's what you hold in your hand. Quite a few documents were selectively left out, and those are called the Gnostic Gospels. That's Gnostic. A common message in those, and one of the reasons they were not canonized and why they are different from Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, is because they talk about the power center being from within. And all of these Protestant denominations that we have now are really about just 10 or 20 degrees tilted from Catholicism, from that original Roman church. In the 1500s, Martin Luther, a monk in Germany, tacked a note on the church, and that's when the whole original and only Roman-based church since the 300s was challenged. It took 1,200 years. So a few things you have to grapple with here is Jesus' historical evidence. It is confirmed by a lot of things, but there were only two Romans and then Josephus, writers of history from that era who ever mentioned him. They were Tacitus, Suetonius, and then Josephus. So you have to ask, this movement that has changed history had very few contemporary mentions in history. And granted, it was mostly an oral culture, so there is that. See, you're not going to prove it. You could spend hours on this, and however you come to it, you're not going to prove it. It has to be through faith. Either have to believe the story or not. It has to make sense or not. I've talked to a lot of people who say almost the opposite of what I experienced. When I was a child, it really connected at age 3 through a stained glass window. Others have said, I never believed it. It just never made sense. It seems controlling. It seems authoritarian, etc. Slap some of those labels on it that I mentioned in the last podcast. Okay, what does that mean? What does it define it? But the Gnostic Gospels were more of we co-create with God. So where I've boiled it down, at least now, two other big influential books for me in narrating Fred Dodson's collection was Levels of Heaven and Hell, three. Levels of Heaven and Hell was one, because that was Constantine's deal. If we control the soul, then we can scare the people that they're going to go to hell when they die. Well, what Fred puts it on is it's all based on levels of energy when we die. I think there's karma built into it as well, but that there is no one hell and no one heaven. God is in many places. God is source, right? Let's make source bigger than our minds. So then what I've considered it to be is that Jesus to me is definitely a portal to God, a way shower, for sure. There are many doors to one room. I use the John chapter 3 story of Jesus talking to Nicodemus, who was one of the religious leaders of the Jews, and came to Jesus by night, it says. He snuck in, and he asked, he said, "Teacher, how do I inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Wait a minute. You're calling me teacher? Look at all your garb you've got on. You're the teacher, and you don't know the answer to this?" And he said, "You have to be born again." That's where that term comes from. Nicodemus went straight into his head, see, this thing we've been talking about, and he said, "Huh? How can I be born again? I can't go back into my mother's womb." And Jesus said, "Oh, you humans." He said, "You have to be born of the flesh, the physical birth, and of the spirit, the spiritual birth." A Jesuit priest about 1900 years later said, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." And Jesus said you had to connect with both. We get them out of balance. We are either too spiritual, too physical, too much focus on the body, too much focus on the mind, where we need to be a balanced combination. We are spirit, we are flesh. It's a miracle. So I see God as encompassing. And then this gets into the whole argument of many claims from Jesus in the New Testament, "I am the only way to God." And that's where I think some of that manipulation came in, because it just fits. It doesn't fit the characteristic of the rest of the letters in red. And that's why I'm saying, if you want to do this, go to the letters in red. And some of those may have even been written in. But the control part, that's the exclusivity. That's the you can only go here. I just think that there are many portals. And here is a reason why. In the very beginning of the book, in Genesis, the first verse, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." That word for God there is Elohim, which can be translated singular as it was and is in most texts. It is also translated plural at other locations in the texts. Let's say that again then. In the beginning, God's created the heavens and the earth. You remember I mentioned Psalms in the Bible. David wrote many of the Psalms, not all. Some are attributed to other writers, but David wrote many of them. And Psalm 82, verse 6, it says, "You are God's." And guess what word it uses? Elohim. Got chills? So we need to open this up to be a lot bigger than what the church constricts. And that's exactly the reason for our overarching theme of this podcast, and that is connecting through our heart. Because just like those songs on last Sunday at the memorial, if we are connecting through our heart, then all of these things can help lift us up. Our karma is our mind. Tune in, plug in, listen through the heart. And these verses, the book, the stories, the music, it all can take you right up into heaven, source, God, the highest levels. That's the portal. So if you are looking at going, if you are looking at exploring this, and if you are opening up to it in some kind of way, I love it. I think we all need to. We've had a high emphasis on Christianity. That's why I wanted to do this. Go take a look. Absolutely explore. And by the way, I'll just kind of wrap up here, but if you're looking for where to go, you could go to the original source, Catholic Church. If you're really exploring and starting from brand new, I think you should. But do what we talked about in the last podcast. Feel into it energetically, not analytically. You could go to a fundamental church, that would be Baptist or Pentecostal. You could go to Presbyterian or Methodist, and there are different sects of Presbyterian and Methodist. Some are more conservative, some are more liberal progressive. I have some friends who are going to a local Methodist congregation, and they really like it. And there's Bible teaching, and it seems to be solid, and it's not the more radical presentation. Whosoever will may come. So you might check a Methodist. I love Lake Junaluska in North Carolina. That is a Methodist retreat center. I'm not advocating it. I've never been a part of it, but I just say if you want the more neutral to at least stick your toe in, you could try some of that. But go where you're led, obviously. This is the spiritual journey, as our friend Ram Dass said, is not a mental journey. It's a heart journey. So a couple of things. I think, number one, you are catching a huge wave if you jump on board in any kind of way, whatever way suits you. I would still highly encourage jumping on the wave. Let's ride it and see where it goes. There is new air breathing spiritually across the world. To do that, we're going to have to put aside judgment, and that's the other piece. Put aside the judgment. Oh, you can judge in so many ways. Oh, Erica is rebounding too fast. She shouldn't be getting, she never really cried. All this, oh my God, people. Judgment. There's a movement going on. People are being touched. We cannot imagine what that family has gone through, the staff, etc. They are a catalyst. They are a piece. They are strong. The energy is there, but it's there totally separated from all of that. That's the beauty of this. You can get on the wave right where you are. We covered that last time. Setting the judgment aside, tuning in with the heart, and see where it takes you. And then one of our listeners was doing something that I thought was really cool, and that is listening to Bible verses. When I get clear of a couple of things that are stacked up for me, I'm going to save my voice now because these audiobooks put a lot of pressure on it, but I would love to record some scripture. But she said that she was listening to Proverbs and the Psalms. She found those two areas, and that was where I came up with, like, if I were advising somebody, that's exactly where I would suggest. And she was just being so blessed by it. And the whole thing was based on the last episode, elevating her mind, elevating her thoughts, and in the process, elevating her soul. So there's a good idea right there. And maybe we just leave it at that. Find some track of verses and loop them and see where it takes you. I think that's a great way to ride the wave. Yoga would be another good way. If you're not in a yoga class, maybe the action step is to join one locally. Get into a regular practice. Go to church, sit in the back. If you don't like it, just walk out. But that's another way. If you're near nature, you could go on a hike. That's my number one. That's where I find God. But I also think that what will be coming from this that we need to be thinking about too is connecting with other people. I like to go on a solo hike. It's very good. But I think also that with this is going to come as part of the wave that we are going to be experiencing a much deeper level connection with like-minded souls. So that's where the church could come in. If you find a good one, then you have that. You'll build that. So these are exciting times. I'm just thinking, if I wasn't so darned old, I'd go back, try to find me a little group that believes the way we do and try to lead it. I stuck my toe into that when I was in North Carolina. It didn't go anywhere, but that's not what I'm to be doing right now, I don't think. But boy, the thought is just great, to be part of this collective that is, if we're moving in this direction and this really does catch fire and goes, this is going to be phenomenal. And I want to be right there at the head of the parade. Hope this helps. Probably all we'll talk about it, so we'll just leave this one to stand and refer back to it. But it's such a big part of the conversation right now that I thought we should stop and take a look at a few things. Thank you so much for listening. I love you. I love you. This is so exciting to be on this journey together with you. To that end, as we always say, enjoy the journey. I'm Thomas Miller. Thanks for listening.